The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, good morning and welcome to the AspDotNet Storefront weekly webinar. My name is Craig Higdon, Web Content Specialist at AspDotNet Storefront and Vortex.
And I'm Joe Lossenheiser, Programmer at Vortex.
Today we're covering setting up the multi-store development environment, tips and best practices. I've actually had a comment that our audio isn't coming through. If anyone can hear this, please go ahead and just drop us a question or mention it in the question section, please. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. All right, so let's, like I said, my name is Craig Higdon. I'm sitting here with Joe Lossenheiser. We're going to be going over setting up the multi-store development environment, tips and best practices. So you've made the jump into multi-store, and now it's time to roll up your sleeves and get to work. In this session, we'll get you up to speed on how to set up your development environment so that you can get your site skinned, configured, customized, and ready to make money. We're going to start by setting up Visual Studio, SQL Server, and IIS. Then we're going to take a look at the files where you do the skinning and individualize your store. We're also going to peek under the hood of a full source version of MultiStore if we have the time and show you where to customize almost everything in your site. And like I said, with me is Joe Lossenheiser. How you doing this morning, Joe?
Pretty good. Let's get started.
All right.
I'm making the assumption that you run the installer for Storefront and place the files into, in this case, the inet hub directory, where I've put mine. I've created the folder Joe Stores for my site. Everything for the MSX version is here. This is a full source version. If you did not purchase full source, yours will not include most of this. You will get just the web and some of the files here. To start out with, one of the most important things is to rename the solution for your setup. Mine's called Joe Stores. And I'm going to rename my solutions that. You can use either Visual Studio 2010 or an older version. Either one works. I'm going to be using 2010 because that's the one I use day in and day out. Jump right in. See all the files over here. Now, if you'll note, it's got the name here, AspDotNetStorefront MultiStore 9. And we're going to be typing that a lot, and that's kind of a drag. So what I'm going to do, and this is a tip that I give to most all developers, is rename that. And you can do that by actually editing the insides of this solution file. Ignore all the gobbledygook. The important thing to look for is that AspDotNetStorefront MultiStore 9 string. And we're just going to replace everything with a simple Joe Stores. And the next time we launch Visual Studio, it will use the name Joe Stores instead, and the reference to my website will also be called Joe Stores, which is quite a bit more convenient than AspDotNet Storefront version 9. I might have got a little bit ahead of myself here. I should have mentioned there's a few prerequisites to with AspDotNet Storefront. One would be familiarity with Windows XP or 7, whichever you're using. Familiarity with C# and .NET. VB.NET is fine too. And if you have a little bit of experience with controls in .NET, that helps as well. Familiarity with XHTML, and I say XHTML because much of Storefront actually is XHTML compliant in that if you don't end your tags with trailing slash or things like that, it will complain or error out. CSS, of course, for styling pages, and JavaScript are also very helpful. we oftentimes here use jQuery, which you can go get, pop into your site. I won't be covering that, but it's a good thing to have if you're going to do a lot of JavaScript. And then a lot of Storefront uses XML, XSLT, and XPath for the product pages, the category pages, things such as that. So familiar with that is also very helpful. Technological prerequisites oftentimes are a .NET 3.5 installation. If you haven't gotten .NET 3.5, you do need it for MX9, and that should be installed on your development machine. I won't be doing that, but you should go get it. Visual Studio 10, as I mentioned earlier. SQL Server, you can get the Express version, and there's free packages. Up on Microsoft's site, you can go, there's the framework, the 3.5 framework that you can get. Also here, you can get almost the entire professional level set of Microsoft tools for free for 3 years, as I see here. That's pretty good. That's a good setup. That's actually what I've used here to get started. Again, I won't be going through that, but you can get it here. One thing I do recommend is using the actual built-in web server that comes with Windows XP or Windows 7. That does mean you have to have the Pro version, but the web server that you get otherwise is called Cassini. It's a little bit, well, it's underpowered, and it doesn't actually represent a lot of what really happens when you deploy a website. So I do recommend in most cases that you use the real built-in web server that comes with the OS. If you are experiencing difficulty, oftentimes all it needs to be is registered. That's this magic little command here. And after the presentation, I'll make sure you get some links on how to, I should have had it there, but I didn't, how to do that. It's almost always the catch that everybody has is if they haven't put the web server IIS on their machine yet, it needs to be registered. And then one other tip, when you install SQL Server, use a named instance. And again, if that's not a familiar term, you can look it up. But it just makes it a little more convenient if later you upgrade from SQL Server Express to, let's say, the full version. You can still have both on your machine if you're going to use a named instance. Okay, so prerequisites out of the way, back to what I was talking about earlier, which was the solution itself. We've renamed the solution, and we've renamed what we're going to call it. In my case, it's Joe Stores. Virtual directory is named Joe Stores. It's a little more convenient. So the next thing to do after we've renamed our solution is to actually create a database to connect to. The easiest way to do that is come into the DB folder. This comes with both a full source and a non-full source version. I'm just going to open it up in a text editor, grab it, and head over to my currently open SQL Server instance. I've already created a database here, but it's pretty straightforward to create a database, pop it in a directory. All you need to do is run a query here with the query analyzer, paste in the DB creation script, run it, and in just a moment you should have a complete AspDotNetStorefront database ready to go. If you see any error messages, that would be uncommon. In most cases you shouldn't see any. And we're also going to need a login. And in most cases you're going to need a SQL Server login, not a domain login. That doesn't make sense and you can ignore it. But the easiest way is just come down to the security SQL Server, create a new login. We'll call it Joe Stores. Everything I'm going to be trying to call Joe Stores. I'm going to even call my password that. I'm going to turn off password security. I'm going to make my default database my new Joe Stores database. I'm going to map it to my Joe Stores database. This little piece is important. If you forget to do it, it won't work. Make it DB owner. So important parts here. Joe Stores, DB owner. Now we can actually access the database from the website. That's all we're going to do here in SQL Server. Don't need this anymore. On to the next piece. Edit the web config. In your installation directory for AspDotNetStorefront, you have a web config file. Much of the details of the site configuration, not the software's configuration, but the actual site, is here. The things that you need to pay attention to are usually marked with TBD. This encrypt key, is pretty important. It's the key for the encryption that you're going to have used by the software. I recommend actually just running over to a site called random.org and just generating 4 text strings. I'll again put these links up later so you guys can use these. Just grab, oops, that's not good enough for me. I want some uppercase and lowercase letters. Just going to grab this string, come on over to my web config, and now I've got some nice random letters and numbers for my encrypt key. And then I'm also going to set up my database. Here it is with the dbcon. In my case, the web server is my machine name. And I did a named instance. This is the named instance part, machine name, database server name. This is my database. This is my user ID. And I made my password the same. Of course, that is not how you'd want to take your site live. And I forgot if I made it plural or not, so I'm going to go check. I called it Joe Stores. Joe Stores, very good. Okay, so that should cover the web config. Those are the only 2 things you really have to worry about at the start, is the database connection, the encryption string. Next thing, when you purchased your copy of Storefront, you gained access to a part of the AspDotNetStorefront site that allows you to get license keys. I have one that is for development, and you will be able to get one too that is for development from that site. You'll also be able to get one for live. In this case, I'm just going to grab the development one, and that goes in the images folder of your site. So here we have the web, images. Drop that in there. That'll make sure that you don't get the big nasty red error message that claims that you haven't purchased Storefront. Next thing is you need to set proper permissions on the AspDotNetStorefront file system. That's pretty straightforward as well. It all takes place again in the web folder. The add-ins folder and the images folder need ASP.NET machine account to have modify. This is so they can write files there. If you don't do that, certain things like image uploading and sometimes debugging information can't be written, and you'll get error messages, or you won't see the images you thought you've just uploaded. And back to where I started, we'll launch it. The easiest way to start up a site usually is just to double-click on the solution. What that does is it lets Visual Studio handle, ignore that error message. It lets Visual Studio handle all the starting up of the website, the configuration of the website even. And it's just a little bit easier to deal with. I'm going to set the website as my startup project, and we go from there. my web config, don't need that. I'm going to launch IAS. That is the built-in web server that comes with Storefront. And check my Joe stores. Seem to have had a little mishap. By launching a little bit early there, I've actually created this instance, which I don't need. And I don't see my Joe stores, which I should be. Oh! And Craig comes in handy. Thank you, Craig. My pleasure. But that's not what I expected to see. I'm going to try this again, and hopefully Visual Studio. Oh, here's. Got to close this. Try it again. I'm looking for is without the error message and a pretty Joe stores. And again, I am not seeing what I expect. I've run into a bit of a difficulty here. What I'm going to do, hopefully to make life easier for me, is I'm going to jump over to a different version that I've already had set up. And I won't bore you guys with trying to figure out how come that is not set up properly. I suspect it's launched it before my first compile. So the one that I already had set up is here. This is a similar setup. Same thing, but it's not going to be called Joe Stores in this case. Let's call them a set. First thing I do is I usually compile. Now, in this case, we don't really need to. It's already been done. You usually compile by right-clicking, saying rebuild solution. Takes a while on this machine. Not going to do that. I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to launch the site, though. First time you launch the site is generally slow. It's doing a lot of homework in the background, compiling the site. So here we're going to be a little bit patient. All right. So here we have the site up and running. I'm going to go into the admin. And one of the things that I recommend is that you delete the default AspDotNetStorefront admin login. We see a lot of stores where that ends up going live with the default password, and that can be a problem because, again, that's the known login. Instead, create your own login. You can do that by logging in originally with the default password, which is, if you look in the manual, AspDotNetStorefront, or excuse me, admin at AspDotNetStorefront, and then the password of uppercase A in admin $11. Once you're in the back end, it's better to come in and remove that account, which is, which I'm not finding. I must have already deleted it in this site. But if you searched on admin, you'd find it, be able to delete it. On to the next. When you're developing, very frequently, you will run across the, if your site takes a certain amount of time to develop, you might get the admin password expiration to go off on you. And it's kind of annoying. One of the things that's good to do is turn off password retries. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong section. Sorry, folks. The demo gods are... Don't know what to tell you, folks. Hold on one moment while I find the correct app config. Try admin and password. So here it is. This is the number of days between resets for admin passwords. I recommend bumping that up. And then on top of it, there's another configuration I will post after the webinar that will let you turn it off completely, although I don't necessarily recommend that. So it's set for 30 days, but a little bit longer is oftentimes good. Storefront has quite a bit of caching built into it. And one of the things when you're developing is you'll oftentimes change something and you won't see the change in the front end of the site, which can be a little bit on the confusing side. So there's a lot of different ways. If you're not seeing the change that you suspect you should have got, that you can essentially refresh. First thing is in your web browser, make sure that you have the caching off. For example, if you're using Internet Explorer, there's caching settings. Here we have it set to automatic. Set it to never. While you're developing, when you go surf the Internet, that's a little different. It's good to have the caching. When you're developing, oftentimes it can be bad. It'll hide CSS changes or JavaScript changes. Another thing you can do is when you're in a browser, hit Control F5 instead of just 5 to refresh the page. That actually causes like what would be like a hard refresh where it tries to reload everything. Along with the caching turned off, that's about the best you can do with the web browser. If that doesn't work, there's this right here in the admin. And pretty much every change you make in Storefront should be followed with an obsessive compulsive click of reset cache. All that does is clear out behind the scenes in Storefront a lot of the cache data. Even when caching is turned off here, which is where you should turn on the caching once you go live, you should hit that reset cache on just about everything. Sometimes it's a little bit voodoo-ish, but it does work. If that doesn't work, then you have to resort to some of the more technical ways of getting the site to refresh. One of which is just what we call touching the web config, which is causes the site to refresh. It's very simple. Go to the web config, open it in text editor, add a carriage return to the bottom, close it, and then when you launch, you'll notice that there's a delay. And that delay is it really restarting. That usually, in most cases, will cause just about everything to be refreshed. It just takes a little longer than hitting reset cache or any of the other methods. And if none of that works, try restarting IAS. And that's even the most severe of restarts. Usually touching the web config will do it, though. Once you start to skin your site, and I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my created earlier. Here in a Joe Stores instance. The skinning takes place, and by skinning I mean, of course, the making the site to your user interface needs. You don't want it to be the cookie cutter site that, of course, Storefront comes with. You want it to look like your site should be. And you do that in app templates and app themes. And if you're familiar with older versions of Storefront, This is a bit of a change. Everything is now contained here. We have skin 1, which is the one that came with the site, came with the software. And we have an app theme for skin 1 as well. And one of the things is I see a lot of people who start with Storefront where they make a copy of skin 1, which is what is recommended by the manual, and work in skin, the new skin that they've created, skin 2. I actually recommend the other way around. I recommend making a copy of skin 1 and just keeping that copy of skin 2 around. Oops, sorry. For a backup and a reference, leaving everything configured in the site to still use skin 1. That way you don't have to go through all the trouble of reconfiguring the site to use skin 2. So once you've copied your skin, made a backup, you can start changing things around specific to your site. Give me one moment, please. The primary places that you're going to be modifying the code to configure it, or I should say design it for your site, well, that did not work either, would be in these master templates. I have two here. I have template.master, which is the one that comes with Storefront and is used almost everywhere. But I've also created a second home plate template master. And the reason here I've done this is because I want to have a slightly different home page than the rest of the site. Right now they're very similar. There's really no difference. But the idea behind it is that I would have a home page that is more like a landing page, and then the rest of the site might have different navigation and whatnot. To do that, there is a bit of configuration. In the admin part of the site, oh, I think I've made another mistake. I apologize, folks. I'll tell you now, this is the first webinar I've done, and I'm learning as I go. Oh, no, here we're good. Okay. So here's the app config that tells the software which template to use for the home page. And then down here, oh, that's it. I'm sorry. This is all you need to configure. And so my home page is slightly different than the rest of it. So let's go ahead and just make a little change here. I could type. And that should pop up home page here at the top. But as I navigate through the site, it disappears. This gives us some flexibility in skinning the site. There is an important bit of code that I recommend that you don't take out of the templates as you skin the site. That's this literal page info reference right here. And what this does is while you're developing, oftentimes you'll be looking at a page and it won't be necessarily obvious what is going on under the hood. If you leave that in, it will tell you on that with that control, when you view the source, what page you're on. And it's a good little thing to have just in case you don't know what XML package is running or something along those lines. I do recommend it's left in. Continuing. Now we need to get into the setting up of the actual store in the admin. You're going to need a default manufacturer. Storefront doesn't come with one, and if you don't have one, you can't add products. Here I've added a few, but it's just an important point. If you go to add a product and you haven't added a manufacturer, it's going to warn you it needs one. It's better to just come and make one ahead of time. And then shipping methods is another one that you're going to need. For development, they don't have to really be the shipping methods you're going to use once you go live. Here I've just added a few. They're very easy to add. Just adding a, we'll call this one overnight. We notice I have two stores. You can ignore that for now. I'll cover it in a moment. Now we have ship methods. Now what that does is it allows us to go through the entire checkout process while we're developing. Other than adding products, those are really the only things that you really have to do to allow yourself to go through the entire process is manufacture, some shipping methods, and some products. Now, in terms of adding products, Storefront has an Excel spreadsheet that makes adding products quite a bit easier than using the admin. The admin's fine for editing and things such as that, but to get going in a hurry, it's always good to use the importer. What I've done here is I have gone and grabbed an Excel spreadsheet from a distributor called ToolWeb, and I've converted it over to the Storefront format, which I'm showing here. The red ones are required, and the rest of them will mostly default for you when you do the import. But this allows you to take a data source that you've already got and through some cut and pasting, allow you to get a lot of products into the site in a hurry. And to bring them in, use the admin, products, import, export, Excel product import, browse, and upload. And it'll take a moment. It's not exactly fast, but it does get them in there. If you so choose, you can look at the log, which is a bunch of SQL gobbledygook. But if you don't see anything that looks bad, doesn't say error, and you can see it completed, you know everything pretty much went okay, and you can accept the import. One thing nice about this is that it'll do a lot of creation that saves you time. In the case of the spreadsheet that I imported, it included departments, or I should say, it just included categories. Did not include departments. So all of these categories came in with my products. I don't have to do anything with them, and they automatically, in Storefront, appear on the front end. Now, if we notice here, navigation, and it's not using departments, I really don't need this. You can change, of course, all of this in the template to, if you're not going to use departments, to get rid of them. Change the navigation. All of that can be changed here in this template master and in this home template master. That, again, that's something you would set up separately if you wanted a different home pages than the rest of your site. I'm not going to do that now. That's a more advanced skinning topic. Image handling. Image handling can be done either in the admin, but we find that almost everyone already has a big source of images that they've already created and they want to use in their site. The default storefront image handling is to name them by product ID, which is the ID that Storefront assigns them in the database, which isn't actually very useful. The Storefront is a convenient solution to that, and called the image file name override. Here I'm editing a product. Oh, sorry, folks. And here it is. This is the name I gave the product's image. And I even went so far as to include that in my import spreadsheet. So my product didn't have images. So this allows me to assign the images without having to worry about what Storefront is giving them as names or anything else. Hugely convenient. One of the things, though, is that they have to match the Storefront dimensions, and they have to be put in the right places. Storefront has 3 image sizes, small, medium, and icon. Or I should say, I got that wrong, large, medium, and icon. Their sizes are in app configs, and you can check those, but they default to 150 by 150, 250 by 250, and 500 by 500. Going from smallest to largest. And I've already gone in and made a bunch of them here, as you can see, and I just copied them into the site. I used a simple image processing utility to take the ones from the distributor, size them appropriately, put them in these folders that match Storefront folder names, and then you can just copy them straight into the site. They go in web, images, product. And adding images is as simple as that. I would suggest, in general, going forward with images. Images are oftentimes one of the more laborious parts of managing the site. Is adopting a strategy of using either the product SKU or something that you can relate to the product directly. It just makes life a little easier in the long run. Now we get to XML packages. XML packages are what control the layout of category, department, any what we term entities, and then also product detail. They exist in those folders that we discussed earlier. Here we have a handful that control some menuing, but by far the majority of them out of the box are in the root of the site, the web, and they're there for your use. Almost all entities that, again, categories or departments, default to this one here, entity grid. And if you wanted to configure it to be different, if you wanted entity grid to be different in your site, in other words, you have some layout that is specific to your categories, you would do this slightly differently. You wouldn't leave it in the root of the site. You would copy it to your own skin folder. And you would do that with any XML package that you were going to use that's going to be different than the default. The way Storefront works is when it starts up and it starts looking for XML packages to display things, it goes through the skin folder first and then the default of the site second, which is that XML packages folder here down at the bottom of the web folder. So that way you can override the site default. In the case of my site, I would want a different product page. I've been using product simple product. I'm going to put that one in there too. This allows me to have a separate simple product XML package in here. I've also even renamed it. That's another possibility, of course. You can copy the simple product and then you can rename it to be whatever suits you. It has to be assigned to the product in the admin, so oftentimes it's just easier to use the default. In this case, I am going to stick with my own name, and I'll show you how to assign that in the back end in a moment. I only changed it slightly. I've just added a little more product information to it, specific to my product, this SKU, this manufacturing number. And that shows up in the front end of the site. Find a product. We see it's missing here. That's because this is using the default. So I'm going to go find this product. It's product 97. It's under 3M. I think I'll navigate to it that way. Sorry, manufacturer 3M. I'm not getting to where I want to be. One moment, folks. There we go. Nope, still not getting there. One moment. I'm going to go ahead and search for it. Like a lot of you folks, I am brand new to MSX myself. I've only been using it for a week or so. So some of the new admin functionality and whatnot is still new to me, so I still sometimes get lost myself. But here we have it, and the important thing is it's using the wrong XML package, so I'm going to go switch it to mine. Go ahead and save it, and unfortunately the save is off the bottom of the screen. There we go. And now we've got my XML package information. Most of the time, the default ones are a good start, and then from there you can go and add the things that you want specific to your product. In this case, it's really just for preference. Okay, so that's the gist of it for a single store. If you have multiple stores in your MSX, it gets a little more complicated. and I'll go over that briefly. MultiStore configuration is here under Store Maintenance, under the Domains tab. And here I have two stores set up, Joe 1 and Joe 2. And once I add a second store, many of the admin functions include options now to assign something to one store or the other. And developing, once you've started down this path, can be a little bit tricky in the sense that it's difficult to see one store's content versus another store's content. And with that in mind, probably the easiest way to get around that is with a host file entry and actually setting up your local web server like almost a live site. To do that, you edit the host file for Windows. Now, I'm not sure how many of you might be familiar with a host file, but it's in your Windows System 32 drivers, etc. host directory. If you look up host file on the internet, you can find out about it. 127.0.0.1 is my machine, and I'm just going to go ahead and set up Joe Store 1 and Joe Store 2. And all this says really is, when my web browser goes to Joe Store 1, go to my local web server. Make that work correctly requires a small change to IIS. The root of the site must point at the root of your Visual Studio, I want to say your virtual directory in Visual Studio. In my case, since I'm using the one I've set up previously, that's here in MSX Web. Now, Joe Store 1 should be my local development version masquerading as a live version. And this does allow you to work as though you have two different stores and saves a lot of headache in the long run versus trying to switch skins or other methods that can be used. We'll give a minute to resolve here. I'll, again, post information later on how to set up the host file. That is actually documented in Storefront manual and knowledge base, but I will give information on that. Once you've got two stores going, there's a lot of configuration and choices about how much you want to limit to one store or the other. A lot of the app configs will now become for one or the other store. A lot of your admin content, let's take, for example, a topic. Let's say the fact page. If your stores have different facts, you can create one for your first store, one for your second store here, and that way, depending on which site they go to, they'll see a different fact. And again, that's where the convenience of having these host header entries that allow you to actually use the site as though it was live come in handy, because then you can see your store 1 fact versus your store 2 fact. One thing that I overlooked was the licensing for multiple stores. Another reason to use the host file system is because your license for multiple stores is much easier to use locally when you have the real domain names. And that's because here, if you look in the About section, it it's actually, my license for MultiStore is actually for those two domains. And if you don't use the file method, you actually get the error message saying your site isn't licensed, which can be annoying and sometimes even a problem when you're developing. So again, I recommend the host file method over just about everything else for when you're using multiple stores. And last, a bit about full source. Full source is a large investment. It takes more work to manage in development, and of course it costs extra. But it does allow you a level of, how do I put it, of ability to modify things that you just can't get any other way. Normally in Storefront, you're really only going to have the ability to modify everything in your web folder. And really you're only going to be able to modify skins and templates. There's a lot you can do there, but if you need to change things more at the functionality level, a full source version is very helpful. And I'll give a really good example of that. When you're developing, for example, you can configure the site to show friendly error messages or throw error messages that are ugly and you wouldn't really want to. And of course, once it goes live, you don't want people to see any error messages that might occur. But while you're developing, they can be very helpful. But in MSX, one of the product team's choices was they actually swallow all the error messages, even when it's configured to not show friendly error messages. And the only way to really get around that is to have a full source version. And you can then change it to show every error message that the site generates. And surprisingly, that's really helpful when you're developing. Here I've commented out a line and compiled the site. Very straightforward. I commented out. I compiled this one project in the solution. And then the next time I load the site, that will be used. What this allows is, for example, if I'm developing in an XML package and I make a typo, that's not legitimate XSL, and I load that product, be a moment. When you do compile a DLL, or I should say if you compile one of your projects and it creates a DLL, it does cause the site to recompile. So you always end up having a little bit of delay every time that you make base source changes. So here we wait. And we have the unable to process your request. We apologize. That's not what we want to see. We want to see a real error message. While we're waiting, I will go ahead and, oh, Craig, would you help me out here? Go ahead and open up for questions in the last few minutes, if I could have you do that. Just go ahead and type them in, and I will do my, oh, I already have some questions. Okay. Let's start at the top. Debugger, very good question. The way I generally do debugging is as follows. I do that while it's still staying. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Debugging. When I need to debug, can I do this? Yeah. Okay. I generally do it as such. First, you have to make sure that your Visual Studio is set for debug mode. Then, of course, you would need to set a breakpoint where you're going to be working with the code. In this case, I've actually set a breakpoint here because last night, in trying to get the error messages to show, I've set a breakpoint here. Once you've launched your site in a web browser and you're using IIS, you can attach to process. It's almost always going to be called AspDotNet_WP. I've never seen it called anything else. So you can attach. You should see, once you do this, you should see usually at the bottom of Visual Studio a lot of this loading symbols or whatever. If you don't see that, usually it means either the web config is not set for debugging or you are in a debug mode. But once you've done this, reloading a page should cause you to hit your breakpoint. And hopefully we hit the breakpoint. It's still loading. And while that's going, I'll go on to the next question. No? Got to close up.
We're going to have to wrap it up after we finish out with this. We'll be able to get to more questions. We'll get them to Joe and get them answered on our blog, blog.AspDotNetStorefront.com. But we're going to go ahead and finish up what we're in the middle of.
As you see, hit the breakpoint here, and we can start walking through it by stepping through. This is the way I do 99% of my debugging each day. It's by far the easiest. There is the option of starting the site with F5 or stepping into it as a debugger. That generally has some drawbacks in the sense of the way Visual Studio handles debugging. So I recommend the attach method.
We're waiting for your error message.
Oh, my error message. Let's see here. Sorry?
Didn't you open it in another tab?
No, it's
okay.
No, it didn't come up.
Okay.
Thank you, folks, and I will try to get as many of your other questions answered as I can, and I appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Joe. Hey, one of the other things, we are recording this, and we are going to post this video in its entirety on our blog, blog.AspDotNetStorefront.com. Hey, we want to thank you all for attending this week. Next week, we have upcoming Understanding Sales Tax Compliance. Sales tax is getting only more complicated every year. Come in next week. We're going to be talking with Matthew Gatton from Avalara. He's going to help us out and help you understand what it takes to make sure your sales tax is in compliance. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Join us next week. Take care. Bye.